Hey everybody, welcome back to the Personal Transformation Podcast. My name is Dan Storey and I'm joined by Adrenogen today. Now, if you know me, you'll know I love a dad joke, a pun, anything along those lines. So Adrenogen is literally Jennie Milton, the adrenaline junkie. She's going to be talking to us about her accolades, I guess, as an extreme sports person. But first, Jen, I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell us all those good things. But let's come back to the beginning of this year. I've written this book, Personal Transformation Blueprint. And one thing I've been talking about lately is this idea that transformation either happens to us or from us. We either find a reason to get unstuck. We kind of enter these situations where we kind of get comfortable. We get stuck in this trap of average and we kind of settle into a groove or a rut, whichever one you want to call it. Or things happen to us that kind of knock us out of flow and knock us out of our normal routine and ask us a question, which is, all right, well, you were doing that. What are you going to do now? Now, you've had some health adversity, some pretty major health adversity at the beginning of this year. So I'm going to let you quickly introduce us all to who you are and why they call you Adrenogen, but then take us through what's been happening this year that's really kind of challenging who you are as a person.
Well, thanks so much for having me on your podcast, Dan, and hello to all your listeners out there. My name is Jennie Milton. I'm from Australia, but they call me Adrenogen, and that's been my nickname since I was a teenager because I've been into adrenaline sports or extreme sports, you might say, from a young age. My parents, I must be one of the luckiest kids in the world because my parents had a sports store from when I was born. And so my brother and I, we grew up skiing in the wintertime, sailing in the summertime, and every new product that came in and out of the sporting world fashion, my brother and I got to try. So we grew up skateboarding and rollerblading and ice skating and playing hockey and doing all these incredible sports. But I was always attracted to the freestyle aspect of sports, the freestyle skiing. And then when I saw a picture of the first ever kiteboarder in my early 20s, boy, did I want to try that sport. And kiteboarding and kite surfing and snow kiting, which is where we use the kite on snow with our skis in the wintertime, has really taken over my life. I have this massive passion for flying kites because flying a kite is something a kid can do. And we all know that as soon as we launch that kite up into the sky, it really lifts our spirits and gives us joy. And then if you can learn to control the kite using my best friend, the wind, then we can use the wind to actually tow us into the waves, tow us up mountains. And I have had such a wonderful life being best friends with the wind and flying kites. Yeah, it's been quite the journey.
That's not a bad life, though, flying a kite. I am definitely trying to stay away from singing some Mary Poppins songs. But also my wife's niece is also starting kite surfing. So she's kind of really getting into this. So, and I've seen people do it. I'm more of a feet on the ground type thing. I'll chase footballs and kind of run after things. And lately you've been finding me a lot more in the gym. But that's your identity. And that's an amazing identity to have. And to have that exposure as a kid and as a young person to those opportunities to just challenge yourself beyond the normal physical realm of just walking around and doing those crazy things. So I'm excited for you, and I can see why the Adrenogen title is so good. Talk to us about what's happened this year then. So that's you. That was you up until the beginning of the year. What kind of came around this year that's kind of causing the challenges?
Well, I started the year off like I do most years. In January, I love to share my love of wind and kites with a bunch of women. And I run these women's clinics where a bunch of women come to me and they're all feeling very nervous. And I help them find their courage to learn how to snow kite. But about a week after that camp, I'd been having a headache during the camp. A week after that, I had gone to the doctor to get some diagnostics, and I was given the really bad news that they had found some aneurysms in my brain. I didn't even know what a brain aneurysm was. I was actually quite excited that they had found something that was possibly causing the headaches, because these headaches had been going on for quite a few months and I couldn't figure out why all of a sudden I was getting headaches. I wasn't that headache type person. And that was a really, really tough diagnosis. I was happy that they'd found something, but when I found out what a brain aneurysm was, and for those of you who don't know, it's where the arteries in your brain, the walls of the arteries get quite weak, and the high blood pressure that we have inside our brains starts blowing out the sides of that artery, very much like a high pressure in a hose or a pipe. Eventually that pipe is going to explode. And I discovered actually how lucky I actually was that they'd found them before they ruptured, because most people get headaches, they can't figure out why, and then the aneurysm ruptures, which causes bleeding into the brain and a stroke. And the outcome of that scenario isn't necessarily a good one. So, boy, only a couple of days later, I was sent to Billings, Montana, where you visited before. And that was where I met Dr. Khan, who is a neurosurgeon that specializes in brain aneurysms. And I felt very grateful that I had somebody that I could go and see only a few hours from home that was going to explain to me what to do about these aneurysms. And he did another test called an angiogram. That's where they do a contrast x-ray of your brain. And he discovered 3 aneurysms. One which was very large at the back of my brain, another medium-sized one at the top of my brain, and another very small one, which he wasn't too worried about, on the outside of my brain. And he told me that 2 of them were actually pretty big and very close to rupture, and he wanted to get me in about 2 weeks later for my first brain surgery. And that's when the fear set in. I'll be honest with you, they call me a tough chick. I've done a lot of scary things in my life, but there were a lot of tears. There was a lot of grieving my life. I have dreams of these adventures. I was planning a trip to snowkite across Greenland with a team of women. I had plans of doing my sports until my 80s. So I really did start grieving my life the way I knew it. And I realized that this was going to be a massive change and transformation in my life, and how was I going to deal with this, both physically and mentally.
Well, let's explore that then, because this is, and I'm very glad that they caught it quickly and that you've been given some expert advice and treatment. One of the things I find is a lot of states are context dependent. So I can be brave and courageous in one environment and terrified and weak like a kitten in a completely different environment. And so even though there are elements that transfer, it's not always the case. So take us through that. You're an adrenaline junkie. You're jumping off of mountains, holding on to nothing but a giant pillowcase, effectively trying to harness this thing called the wind and hoping that your best friend is going to catch you. But effectively, you put a lot of trust in the laws of physics and consistency of meteorology. Now you end up lying down on, a surgery table, and I'm assuming they gave you some anesthetic, and you're wondering what's on the other side of that. What's going on in your head? Like, what's going on for you when you're normally brave and courageous, and you're now in a different context? How does that feel?
Well, it probably feels very similar to those women who come to my snowkiting camps. They've never done it before. And so there's a lot of fear involved, and a lot of fear of the unknown. And you're always thinking of the worst case scenarios. And so I knew that I had some skills and experiencing in helping other people overcome fear. And now I had to use those lessons to help myself, because I'd never had brain surgery before. So this was new to me, and it didn't matter how brave or strong or courageous I was in other areas of my life. This was brand new, and it was out of my control. And so I really decided that I would go back to the basics of psychology and positive mindset. And I realized that having something that I could chant over and over again to myself to remind myself of all of my strengths, was going to be important. And so I designed something that went like this. I'd be brave. I'd be strong. I'd be lucky. I'd be loved. I'd be grateful. I am the storm. And that was something I chanted hundreds of times before I went into surgery. And they were the last words that went through my head as that anesthesia started to take effect as I was lying on that doctor's table.
As you say those, honestly, my heart is tensing up. My whole breathing stopped as I was listening to those words. Those are powerful. And I love the power of affirmations from a state management perspective. A lot of people kind of question them, but if you embody them, if you believe that, and that I am the storm at the end is a powerful metaphor and representation, that's going to give you the strength. And there's a lot of science and research and kind of just stories about the importance of positive mindset going into anything along those lines. So well done. That's very cool. Talk to us about grieving. It's an interesting word. And I know there's stuff on the other side, but one thing that, so I'm just behind me. I can't see him, but he's with me most of the time, is Arnold Schwarzenegger. So the reason I keep Arnold with me is for a couple of reasons. Number one, I like that quote. But number two is his ability to transition and to move from one thing to another without being tied to the other thing. So he was a bodybuilder and then he moved into acting, right? Okay, decent transition, but it's still a big jump. And then from acting into politics, it's like, that's crazy. You look at imagine someone like me in the gym going into politics. That's a huge jump. And I have an identity and I'm attached to that identity. We often get attached to things that we struggle to let go. And you've talked here, it's grieving. It's this idea that who we are no longer exists. That's effectively it, right? It's that person, that old adrenogen. Maybe there's a 2.0 version coming up. We don't know yet. But that old adrenogen just isn't going to be able to exist moving forward. Take us through that grieving process. How did you feel about that? How did you let go? What did you let go of? And then we'll talk about kind of the 2.0 version, if there is one, afterwards.
I would love to share that with you, because that was quite a mindset shift that really helped me get through this extreme traumatic time in my life. And at first I was grieving adrenogen. Could I ever be adrenogen again? Or was that the end? Was I grieving the death of adrenogen? I've had injuries before as an athlete. I've had some extreme injuries, and it reminded me back to when I had spinal surgery, and it put me out of action for 12 months. And I remember having a similar feeling then. And that was, after spinal surgery, can I get back to high-level sport? And I had a lot of evidence of that, because many people have actually had spinal surgery, including my mum and my husband. And my husband is an incredible athlete and Alaskan heli ski guide, and he had gotten back to a high level of sport. So having that evidence was something that gave me hope. But this time during the brain surgery, I was struggling to find those stories of hope. I didn't know anyone else who had been through what I had. And so this was a different situation. I had to manifest, visualize, and try and come up with these visions of me getting through this and either getting back to my sport or visualizing a new life that I was just as passionate about as my old life. And I decided that I could pivot my passions. You might call it a transition. I called it pivoting my passions. And my passion was to share my love of kites and wind with others. Just because I couldn't do the sport myself didn't mean I couldn't share my love of wind and kites with others. And the second part of my journey through that surgery, apart from those positive affirmations that I mentioned before, was that my ICU plan, I had some certain items with me that brought me strength. Just like your Arnold Schwarzenegger picture there, Dan. I had a little stuffed polar bear with me. And the polar bear is my spirit animal. It reminds me of strength. And a polar bear is one of the most patient animals out there. They have to wait in their den for long periods of time, conserving their energy until they see a seal, and then they make their move in order to get their fuel and their nourishment, to get their energy. They can't wander around and use up all their energy. And so the polar bear, I've got many stories about polar bears, but it is my spirit animal, and I had this bear with me to remind me of that strength and patience I was going to need going through this. And the other thing that I brought to ICU was a kite. Believe it or not, I brought a kite with me, and it was the world's smallest kite. It's made out of tissue paper and little bamboo toothpicks, and this kite flies with no wind. And I remember after I sort of came to and out of my drugged state, I asked my husband to pass me my kite. And I pulled that kite out, and he helped me unwind the lines. And I remember swirling this kite around my head and watching this kite start to fly with these beautiful red tails behind it. When I saw that kite fly, I had the biggest smile on my face. My husband has a picture of me lying in that hospital bed attached to all of these tubes and machines. And here I am finding joy flying a kite, which was that inner child in me remembering the joy that I get from flying kites. And that moment really reminded me that I can still find joy doing what I love. It might just be a smaller kite for a while, not those big ones that tow me up mountains. And it also reminded me that I can share my passion for wind and kites with a variety of people. It doesn't necessarily have to be those other extreme athletes like myself who ski and surf and snowboard. I can actually start sharing those lessons with children who could learn to love wind like I do, and who can find that joy in flying a kite. And so I made the decision in that ICU room that I was going to write a book for children. And I was going to call it Gale and the Red Kite of Courage, because that little red kite that I was flying in that hospital bed was giving me the courage to pivot my passions and to continue sharing it with others, just in a slightly different way. And I think that was what gave me hope that Adrenogen 2.0 was being born.
There's so many elements in that. I love the polar bear metaphor of just patience until it's your opportunity to come back and strike again. That's some powerful imagery. Oh, Jen, you're good at telling stories. People keep telling me I'm good at telling stories, but honestly, you're kicking my butt today, which is great. I want to dive into the kids' book. I want to talk about that. Obviously, I mentioned I've got a young daughter. She's coming up to 5 years old, so I definitely want to be reading her some books. I want to find out what the message is in that without giving the game away too much. But talk to us about your thought process. So I'm writing a new book at the moment. It's called Unstuck, and it talks about the psychology of why we get into ruts. And our kind of brain psychology is designed to maintain the status quo and to keep us safe and all those kind of fun things, which is good from a survival perspective, but not as good from an existence perspective. The next part is to figure out what we want and what we want to do and how we move forward. Now, a lot of people will tell you what they don't want. I don't want to do that anymore. I hate that, and all these things. How did you get so clear? Because it sounds like you have a very clear forward-thinking plan, or at least a couple of elements. How did that conversation go in your head where you were like, okay, well, this is what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to channel myself?
It's amazing. For many, many years, Dan, I've been trying to find clarity in how to achieve our goals, and clarity in how to get through the challenges in our lives. And it's always been a challenge to find that clarity. But for some reason, I was gifted from the universe these moments of such clarity in the ICU room in that hospital after my brain surgery. And I really don't know why, but I'm so grateful for that gift. It was quite a spiritual moment. And I love doing a lot of the positive trainings and reading books like what you're writing that really helps us turn the negatives into positives in our lives. And I remember watching a Tony Robbins training and he has some great positive stuff. And he asked the question, and I felt like he was asking it to me that day. He said, is there more knowledge left in a graveyard or a library? Whew, boy, that was like just a stab to the heart. All of a sudden, I realized that I was in my 50s. I had just had a close call with death, and I was lucky enough to have survived, and I hadn't shared my knowledge. And maybe some of that comes from, my respect to the native Alaskan Inuits. And I've been so lucky to have spent some time up in their villages and learning from them, and knowing that the elders share their knowledge of hunting and survival and life with the younger generation. And I realized that I don't have my own children. I'm not sharing those lessons with my children every day, and that I had shared my lessons of sport with a lot of the clients and students that I'd have over the years. But there was so much more that I had to share in these incredible experiences that I've had in life. I've been gifted a life degree in overcoming fears. In my lifetime, I was charged by a polar bear. I've been caught in an avalanche. I've had brain surgery, back surgery, jumped out of airplanes. I mean, my life seriously has so much experience that you can't learn at a university. And it was my time to share that knowledge before I was going to that graveyard. And I knew that 2 weeks later, I was going in for my second brain surgery. So, boy, I only had 2 weeks. I better get going. And
you wrote this book in 2 weeks.
I actually did get the basis of this book out in 2 weeks, because I knew that if I didn't survive that surgery, I wanted to make sure that this particular lesson that I wanted to share with children, and it was a story that was based on my true life of when I was a little girl. I wanted to get that out there, and that was so important before I went in for that second surgery. And lucky I survived that second surgery and was able to do an even better job with that book by finding an incredible illustrator and getting that book as something that I'm so proud of, because I wanted to make sure that if it was my time to go, I was going to be proud of myself.
Yeah.
We spend so much time trying to make our parents proud of us, trying to make our peers proud of us, trying to impress everybody through our lives. But one of the lessons I learned coming that close to death was that when it's my time to go, the most important thing is for me to be proud of myself and for the things that I did with my time that I had here on this planet. And so writing a children's book series, it's turned from 1 into a 3-book series, was very, very important to me. And also sharing my stories on podcasts like this one, Dan. I'm so grateful that I get this opportunity to share this story with others. And hopefully if somebody else is going through something similar, that this story gives them hope.
Jennie, bring up the book. I know you've got it there with us. Just give us a quick glimpse on the screen of that. And if you're listening to the audio on this, the illustration is beautiful. Gail and the Red Kite of Courage. I'm excited to get a copy and read that with my daughter. I remember being in Paris. Oh, that's a beautiful picture. Look at that. Check it out. Well, I'll post some links in the show notes for those of you who are listening. But I remember being in Paris, this is many years ago, and I must have heard something similar. And I went to Père Lachaise cemetery, which is where there's a number of famous people buried in Paris. And having that same thought is that, in the graveyard, there's, a lot of opportunity and potential that's never realized. And I think, Les Brown has said it, and many speakers have said it, is that, at the end of your life, you get confronted by all of the traits and skills and talents you have. And if you've never experienced or released them, then it's a terrible waste. You also, on the graves, only get like the 2 dates and a tiny little line. And it's what you do on that line. It's a very small line that makes an impact. So I'm excited for you. I think also the word you use there is proud is a really profound word. And I don't think I've been using this one quite a lot lately. And I've been asking people, a few people we've been working with from a career perspective, is that what would make you feel proud? And every time I use that word, it stops them in their tracks. because they never think about it. They never think about how they want to feel and experience the world. And that idea of pride is so powerful. I remember my first bodybuilding show, this was a couple of years ago now, and it was a challenge that I'd set myself. And I remember being backstage before the show, and I'm kind of getting ready and I'm getting into headspace, and I put my shorts on. I'm in the bathroom and I just I'm there on my own. I look in the mirror and I catch my face, and there was a moment where I just felt proud and recognized the effort that I put in, and I was genuinely proud of myself. It brought a tear to my eye, and I was like, I haven't challenged myself. I haven't done things like this for a long time, and that experience was just, I felt really good in that moment for having done something valuable and worthwhile for myself, not for anybody else, but just for me. Sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but let's come back to this. So you're lying on a bed, all right, and you've got cables coming in and out, cables, wires, tubes, whatever they are, I don't know. Probably should, well, not in medicine. You get this idea, you're going to write a kid's book. Now, a lot of people have the idea that they're going to write a book or do something extreme like that. And then immediately another voice kicks in, which is, don't be stupid, Dan. Like, you're not an author. You can't write books. Like, who are you to talk about writing books? Like, well, you've never done that. You're this person over here. All these excuses kick in. You're obviously going through a significant, you said, spiritual, emotional, physical event. Did that voice kick in? Did anything pop into your head and say, nah, adrenaline, you just get back out and hold on to the kite and surf down the thing? Where was the doubt? Was there any kind of worry that you could never write a book? And how did you deal with that when it came up?
For probably the first time ever, Dan, I had no doubts. I had no doubts. I had that clarity. I had that positive outlook. I felt like if I only had one day left, what was I going to do in my one day that was going to make me proud of myself if I was going to pass away? And that was writing my story and leaving a legacy, leaving something behind that I was proud of, a lesson. So to be honest with you, no, there was no doubt. There was only, this is my story, and you can't tell your story wrong because it's my story. You can't go wrong with that. Maybe if I'd had the idea of writing a 12 or 15 chapter novel, yes, I might have had some doubts because I know that takes a long time, and I might have doubted my vocabulary and remembered that I didn't do well at English at school. But the challenge of writing a children's book seemed achievable. A children's book has 1,000 words or less. It's called a picture book. And I'm a very visual person, so I wanted to either use my own photographs or find a great illustrator who could bring this vision to life. And I felt that it was achievable to tell my own story in 1,000 words or less. And there was no doubt in my mind that I couldn't get that done before my second surgery.
Without giving too much to plot away, and don't give me the ending, but within this, you've got so many stories that you can tell. You've got so many metaphors that you've even shared already just on this show. What are some of the key things that you think we need to be teaching our kids? And what are some of the lessons that are in that book do you think are most important for children to learn now so that they can fully experience life?
When I was writing that book, at first I wanted to write it to leave a legacy. What I didn't realize until I actually started writing it and putting it together, that it was actually therapy for myself. I started writing the story of when I was 11 years old and my brother was 9, and he was diagnosed with cancer. And my brother was told that he was going to have his leg amputated at the age of 9. And that was a very traumatic time for my family. This was back in the early 80s, where they didn't have all of the same modern technology for dealing with cancer. And so the percentage chance of his survival was very small. And I, as his sibling, suffered a lot of depression and sadness, but also a lot of shame because I was craving attention, that I was going through something that was heartbreaking and creating some depression with myself. But I knew my brother needed all of that attention. And I was only 11 years old. I'm a little girl. Little girls need their daddy's and mum's love. But my brother needed it more at that time. And he was given a lot of focus, which was what he needed by my family and close friends back at that stage. And so I ended up feeling very, very isolated and suffering from depression throughout my whole teenage years. It didn't just come and go as my brother survived. It actually lasted, and it actually grew, and it brewed into eating disorders and self-esteem problems and self-doubt. And when I was feeling that depression, I just wanted to stay in my room. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to play with anybody or my friends. And it's still a time in my life that I think back to, and I'm so sad for that little girl. Today, in this modern world, if one kid gets cancer in a family, they have programs to support the siblings, because they now know that this is something that the whole family needs support in, not just the child going through that cancer. But unfortunately, back in the 80s, that was not something that I was able to get. And so as I started to write this story, I realized that this was my way of giving therapy to myself and healing myself, which was so, so important. And it reminded me that my brother had actually given me my first kite as a present. Wow. And I've forgotten that for a long time. I mean, I've shared with you how important kites are in my life. And it was my brother who had the idea that maybe Jenny would like to get a kite for her birthday. And he bought me this red kite. And I'd never flown a kite before. I was very nervous about flying this kite. I wasn't enjoying going outside. I was actually afraid of the wind, scary wind in the trees, right, back then. But my dad was a sailor. And so I got my dad to take me outside and to fly this kite. And I found the courage to fly it. And when that kite lifted up, I felt a connection with the wind, with Mother Nature, with the universe. And I smiled for what seemed like the first smile and giggled for the first time in what seemed like years. And that kite gave me so much joy that it then gave me the motivation to want to go outside and fly that kite again the next day. So that one amazing gift from my brother really ended up pulling me out of that depression, giving me courage. And so that's why I called this book Gail and the Red Kite of Courage. Gail is actually based on myself, and let me share an illustration with you. Maybe you'll see a resemblance here with Gail.
Oh yeah, I see the familiarity in the cap. Yeah.
A cap, and I wear a star around my neck, and I named the character Gail after Gale Force Winds. So she's named after the wind, and ultimately her grandma ends up taking her to a kite festival, and she gets to meet other kids that love flying kites too. And I'm so proud. One of the things I wanted to do with this book was to honor my brother. I wanted to honor my parents. And I also dedicated this book to my grandma, who turned 100 years old this year. And so this seemed like the perfect gift that I could give my grandma and give my family and leave a legacy while I was going through this hard time of these brain surgeries. And probably my favorite illustration in the book is a picture of my brother and I flying kites together. We had both found courage to overcome what we were going through. And there's a picture of my brother with one leg flying a kite with me next to him. And that's just such a beautiful memory that I remember doing sports with my brother as well.
That is such a cool story. I look forward to reading that to my daughter, and I will be, I'm assuming it's on Amazon. I can go and find it on Amazon somewhere. Amazing.
Yes, you can.
That will be in the shopping cart very shortly. Jen, I think we could talk all day about stories, the metaphors, the experiences. We haven't even talked about your extreme sports and adrenaline junkie background. I don't think I want to go into it. I think I'd rather leave that as a, it's the icing on the cake. But I think in this instance, I have to stop talking about cake. I've got 8 days of diet left. That's basically it until I compete for the Mr. Olympia. So after that, I'll be able to talk about cake. But I don't want to ruin this. This has been such an emotional and in-depth experience of how do you face adversity and how do you accept fear and use these opportunities to gain clarity and to move forwards, to feel proud. I think this has been such a cool story. Thank you. One of the things that I've figured out over time, and recently especially, is there is a red thread that runs through our life. Maybe it's attached to the end of a kite, I don't know. But as we look back through our life, the events connect, and there's a theme and there's a trend, and we can easily connect the dots when we're looking back. And it's very difficult to connect the dots looking forwards. You've had some moments of clarity, and you've been able definitely to take some future steps. What does Adrenogen look like for 2.0? Now, you mentioned that you don't have any role models for going on and kite surfing. You don't have those examples of people who've survived brain surgery and gone on and done amazing things. You've obviously pivoted, and I love that word. But what have you got in hope for Adrenogen 2.0?
I'm visualizing, Dan, that I'm going to get back to my sport, and I'm going to be able to tell that story of hope, because my story isn't over yet. And I'm still not quite the story that I was looking for before my brain surgeries, because I'm still in this recovery period. And I haven't been given permission from my doctor to get back in the gym and to start getting strong again and to get back to my sports. But I believe in my heart, I believe in my soul, and I believe in my visualizations that I'm going to get back to my sport and that I'll be snowkiting again in the near future. And when I do achieve that goal, I am going to be in a new place of gratitude and being so grateful for my sport and so grateful for my life. And I'm also going to have all of these extra things with me, such as my children's books and my speeches that I get to speak on stage, that I've shared my stories, shared my lessons, I've inspired, I've given hope. And all of that is like a big puffy down jacket that I'm wearing that's going to keep me warm as I age, because I really feel like I could have spent this last year depressed and really grieving and suffering in my life. But I'm so proud of myself that I have turned these negatives into positives. I've pivoted my passions, and I'm so proud of myself for doing that. And thank you so much for allowing me to share these stories. A lot of people love hearing all of my stories of avalanches and polar bears and all the extreme sports. But to be honest, I think the stories that I shared with you today are so much more powerful and so much easier for people to relate to. And there's some valuable lessons there that I hope other people can use to see hope in their situations.
I think one of the things that, and I appreciate you being as open and frank as you have been, is that we always see the shiny things. Like, we just need to turn on, social media or anything along those lines, and we should see all of these things of, and Red Bull do it so well. It's like the people surfing down a mountain or bicycling off the top of the Empire State Building or whatever it is. I don't know, but there's some crazy things that they do. And we often look at those and we think, oh, of course, that they're special. Like they're unique individuals that go off and have these things. And I couldn't do that because I'm terrified of, bees and, getting a splinter and things like that. It's not that we're just people. Right? We're just people that do these things because I don't know, like we find enjoyment, and like you said, it brings something out of you that is there, and fear is present, like doubt is present, reasons not to do it are present. Like all of these elements, we get a million excuses. There's so many reasons why we should say no, that's a terrible idea, don't do that, all of these things, and yet we only need one thing to hang on to, and it's that element of hope. And I think you've highlighted that so well. So anybody who's listening, who's in that moment, oh, I'm scared, I'm terrified, yeah, we all are. Like that's the coolest thing. Like and now it's just a question of, can you move forward? Like, can you take one little step forward? And if it's that tiny little kite that doesn't need any wind to fly, like that's the beautiful metaphor for taking the first step forward. Adrenogen, thank you. Looking forward to meeting Adrenogen 2.0 and hearing that story of hope and recovery. That's going to be a phenomenal story. Give us the book title again. I'm going to go and put it into Amazon and encourage everybody with kids to do the same.
It's called Gale and the Red Kite of Courage by Jennie Milton.
Phenomenal.
Thank you so much. I hope your daughter loves it. And I wanted to also share that I'm actually raising money for a children's cancer charity that supports families and siblings with cancer. So this is not a project to make money. It's a project to help others and to share my stories. And believe it or not, I found a charity in Australia, a cancer charity that's doing an incredible job. And believe it or not, it's called Red Kite.
Oh,
the universe gifted me with the perfect charity to support, and so you're not just supporting your children, you're supporting a cancer charity as well by buying that book.
That's incredible, and you are the perfect patron for that charity. Jennie Adrenogen Milton, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today. And if you've listened and you've been inspired, then definitely check out Jennie. I'll put links to everything she's doing in the show notes. Thanks, Jennie.
Thank you so much, Dan.